This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.
So good morning everybody and welcome to the 83rd meeting of the Economy Committee. Some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf and the witnesses today will be briefing us via Starleaf. The meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public and a recording will be made available on the committee's webpage on the Assembly website. Just to remind members that bill briefings will be hand-started as is protocol, and also to remind members to mute their tablet devices when they aren't speaking. We have apologies from John. Do we have any other apologies, Peter?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair. Claire's online and we're just hoping Keith's coming along fairly soon.
Okay, no problem. So moving on then to item number 2, which is our draft minute. There is a copy of the draft minutes from the meeting held on the 1st of December page, and that those are an accurate reflection of the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on then to item number 3, which is Chair's business. So 3.1 then at page 15 of our packs, there is a copy of an invitation from the Human Rights Commission to register to attend the launch of the 2021 Annual Human Rights Statement on Thursday the 9th of December from 12 to 1 p.m. So that's for members to note. There is then 3.2, a memo from the Clerking and Member Support Office at page 16 of our packs regarding an online session on deaf awareness, which is part of the Member Development Programme. Again, that's for members to note. Then 3.3. Just to remind members that the committee indicated it was content for me as chair to attend the Interparliamentary Forum on Brexit, which is happening on Friday. And while I am overdoing that meeting, there is also a meeting requested informally with Lord J, who is chair of the Lords Subcommittee on the Protocol, to get an update on its work. And the committee will be aware that we have previously had correspondence and met with that committee, and also that the committee copies its correspondence to us. So just to seek agreement that that meeting takes place with Lord J. Okay, so moving on then to 3.4. Yesterday, the Deputy Chair, Matthew, and myself met with the Minister and officials regarding the parental bereavement leave and pay bill, and the amendments that were made at consideration stage, which the Minister obviously had outlined his objections to in the course of the debate, but which the committee had previously had considerable discussions with officials with the Bills Office and had advice from the Office of Legislative Counsel around. So through some discussion with the Minister, they outlined that there is points in time that HMRC have to be notified of changes that are going to be made in the future in relation to what we wanted to do to put in place the provision for miscarriage leave, and that they might need a little bit more time to make sure that that can be put in place. And our amendment set out that it would be that the regulations would have to be brought forward within 12 months of the date of royal assent of this bill. It might go beyond that point to April 2024 is what the HMRC is saying, that it will require to put in place that provision, or to put in place the systems to allow that provision. So the department would require a longer period therefore provided in legislation, and so that would require an amendment of further consideration stage. We also had some discussion around the 26-week qualifying period, which the committee has removed from the legislation. And similarly, there may be some difficulty in getting the HMRC systems in place to allow that to happen, and that therefore there could be the need to give some additional time to allow that to happen. I think that's a fair summary. Matthew might want to come in to add to that. So the provision of the parental bereavement leave and pay bill as it was introduced can still be put in place in April 2022 if those changes can be made. So the bill as it was introduced can still go ahead as planned in April 2022. The further consideration stage is going to be scheduled for just after the new year. Obviously the committee's amendments that were made would be provided for, but may just need that little bit more time. So I said I would bring it back to the committee to seek views, and be for individual committee members to take positions around all of that. And as Peter might want to come in just in relation to the processes around how that moves forward as well. But Matthew might want to reflect on his views from that meeting as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think you broadly captured it. I suppose the key takeaway is that the department believes that the provisions that we have, the provisions that the Assembly passed by amendment, are not logistically achievable by April 2022, and if we take them at their word, and they offered an explanation around HMRC and the processes they have to go through, and they're obviously they have a kind of customer relationship with HMRC. What they're saying is that it will be an amendment or multiple amendments at further consideration will allow those to be introduced. So the core part of what the committee sought, which is to put those rights on the face of the bill, will be achieved, but not at precisely the same moment as the initial rights that were in the bill is introduced.
Chair, Mr.
Thanks,
Dixon.
Peter, is there anything you want to add at that point?
Chair, Mr. Dixon just wanted to make a comment.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of you for going to meet the Minister yesterday. I think that was very helpful for the committee. It's good news that the amendments and the intent of the bill remains intact. Of course, and we've indicated this all along, that we would be happy to see it to cooperate in terms of an amendment which, if more time is required, I don't think anybody is going to object to that, as long as it does not interfere with the intent of the bill, which is very clearly to deliver for both miscarriage and for payment as a week one right. Just when that comes into force and into being, of course we have to work with the department and HMRC in that. But Chair, just very briefly, and not for further discussion now unless others know different, it would be helpful to me, and I'm sure to the committee, if we had a full understanding of the role that HMRC play in these matters, what exactly the arrangements and technical arrangements are that they are required to do in relation to this and exactly what the changes are that they will have to make to the systems. I'm sure they will be able to provide a simple guide to that, as presumably they do for employers in all the changes that they make. But just from our perspective, I think it would be helpful for us to understand exactly what work HMRC has. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, sorry.
And just, I suppose, to come back on that point, as Matthew says, it seems to be, quite a transactional relationship. And from discussion with the officials, there seems to have been considerable discussion with HMRC around potential changes that would be required. So yes, I think it might be helpful, Peter, if we could get some clarification just around all of that. Did you say that someone else was wanting to come in there?
Mr. Weir.
Yeah, no, just Chair. I suppose this is. I mean, I think pretty much fairly clear, but just from the point of view of clarification, effectively on the way forward, just so that we're all exactly on the same page. So I suppose really summary of the meeting is that the bill, taking on board the fact that it obviously at consideration stage a range of amendments have gone through, which in terms of call it the point of substance in terms of what the change will be, are because obviously once something's been made at consideration stage, further consideration stage is to some extent a refining of what is there. What we're looking at is effectively the bill, but in slightly disaggregated. So if we sort of call it the original bill, would still then in effect take effect from April of 2022, and those parents, for instance, who had suffered a bereavement in what was in the original text would then still be able to effectively benefit from 2022. But we have a situation where, because of the arrangements with HMRC, that the additional elements to it, which would be the miscarriage and the 26-week bit, those are effectively disaggregated from the initial bit, and the commencement of those would in effect be at a point probably in 2024 on that basis. And in terms of that, I assume part of that would be at least that it would, therefore, in terms of those amendments, those would be departmental amendments that would be brought forward. But I assume whether it's being formally sought or whether it's just being slightly more informally, that would be at least with the judging, I think, we can all see where the lie of the land is on this particular, but that those at least as a way forward would be with the acquiescence at least of the committee in terms of approach. Correct in terms of the summary of that, really?
I think that's a fair summary. Yes, the bill as introduced and the provisions of the bill as introduced go ahead in April 2022, which was always the committee's intention and was why we had put that 12-month period in place to allow the miscarriage leave to be brought forward, and in recognition that there would be consultation required around a number of issues in respect of that. And as set out, it's believed that will require more than 12 months. And I don't think any of us would be, and I think this was reflected in the course of the debate as well, in any way inflexible around that. As Matthew said, the intent in having that included in the bill as being achieved at consideration stage. And as you say, it's a refining, I guess, of timing really in respect of that. The 26-week and the removal of that, obviously, that's something that the committee felt strongly about, or the majority of the committee felt strongly about achieving. And it seems to be difficult to achieve that immediately for April 2022. And HMRC, if I understand correctly, wouldn't be very willing to look at doing two changes separately in respect of this provision. So it would be likely that they would do the two things together for April 2024. What I'm unclear about is if there is some other way of potentially paying anybody who very unfortunately suffered a bereavement in the interim under the provision of the current bill. So those parents who suffered the death of a child or a stillbirth, and they were in the first 26 weeks of their employment. Is there some other way of ensuring that those people are covered? That's something I'm not clear about, Peter, and perhaps we could seek some clarity on it. But as I understand, the provision to technically allow that to happen by HMRC would have to be delayed to 2024, I think is the broad summary of it.
Chair, if members are content, then we'll write to the Minister indicating that there is consensus across the committee with the proposal as you, the Deputy Chair, have outlined, and asking questions about just the detail of the HMRC process so that we have a better understanding of how that works, and also clarity on the 26-week period, whether a workaround can be done in the meantime before that provision is made with HMRC and alongside miscarriage in April 2024. So if members are content, we can write to the Minister on that basis.
Can I just, Chair, if I may, I think it's also worth making clear that I think the way we left it with the Minister was that, I mean, obviously the Chair and I couldn't speak on behalf of other members of the committee in terms of people's agreement to the amendment. So we didn't agree to the amendments because sight unseen. We said that we would look at them constructively. So you might want to reflect that. It wasn't a no. I'm sure we all will look at them constructively, but it would have been presumptuous, I think, of us to say to agree wholesale to amendments that haven't yet been drafted. And indeed, I think the department wanted to have the extra time to draft them because they want to get them right and work with OLC.
I think that's a fair point that Matthew's making, Peter. We obviously did not speak on behalf of the committee, having not discussed these issues with the committee. And as Matthew has outlined, obviously we would like to see what is being brought forward, obviously, before we would take a firm decision around those things. But that the intent, as has been outlined, I think that, like, certainly, and speaking on behalf of myself, that I would be quite content to see that brought forward.
Chair, I'd like to clarify that. Mr. Dunn just wants to come in.
Just briefly, Chair, or Peter, maybe, just to confirm then, it'll be on Tuesday the 14th then, as per originally scheduled. It'll be January. What date was it in January?
We haven't got a specific date in January. I'm actually literally live in the emails with the Bill office now. So we're trying to pin down what exact date that is.
Yeah, it'll not be next Tuesday.
No, yeah. the department won't go for a further con next Tuesday, so it'll be in the new year. I don't know that it would be as early as the additional plenary on the 11th. I don't think it would be as early as that. Oh, right, okay. So forget I even said that. So we're literally pinning that down live now on email. So as soon as I have that date, I'll get that out to members. But if members are content now that that we've captured what members want to say in the letter, then we can go ahead on that basis. Thank you. Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. And just also on around that broad discussion that we've been having about the bill, the issue of repercussive costs came up in the course of our discussions and in the course of the debate, and it might be useful if the committee would seek legal advice around that general principle of repercussive costs through break and parity in respect of employment law, and if members were content, that's something that we would seek to do.
Members content? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So moving on then to item number 4, which is the Employment 0 Hours Workers and Banded Weekly Working Hours Bill, and a briefing from the bill sponsor, Jemma Dolan, MLA. So, Peter, do we have Jemma in the...
We do, Chair. Jemma and Pearse McFlynn are there, and Tom's just moved them up now.
Okay, so members, there is a clerk's memo at page 19 of your packs. The Employment 0 Hours Workers and Banded Weekly Working Hours Bill, as introduced, is at page 22 of your packs. The explanatory memorandum, explanatory and financial memorandum is at page 38 of your packs, and just that this is the committee's opportunity to discuss the bill with the proposer prior to the second stage debate. Peter, do we have a date for the second stage debate as yet?
Not pinned down as chair again. That's one of the ones we're working on.
So I'd like to welcome to this morning's meeting Jemma Dolan, MLA for Fermanagh South Tyrone, who has introduced the bill, and our policy advisor, Pearse McFlynn. So if I hand over to yourself, Jemma, to make an opening statement, and then we will bring members in for some questions.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to you all. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to brief you on my PMB to ban 0-hour contracts and to replace them with banded hour contracts. As the Chair has said, with me is Pearse McFlynn, my policy advisor, and we both really appreciate your time today. We know how pressed for time committees are at the minute, so I'll give you a short run through of how the main principles of the bill, and then we'll be happy to take questions. So this bill will end the use of 0-hour contracts in our labour market and replace them with banded hour contracts. This proposal has been made in recognition of the fact that there are around 11,000 0-hour contract workers in the north, although upon meeting the Labour Relations Agency last week, they reckon this figure is vastly underestimated. 0-hour contracts do not provide workers with guaranteed hours or income. In reality, this means that workers are expected to be readily available to work shifts which may never materialise. These contracts also disrupt access to social security due to the unreliable and unpredictable nature of these contracts, and it's difficult for workers to maintain consistency in their eligibility and entitlement. This can also impact on so-called passported benefits, such as help with health costs and free school meals, and can, in some cases, lead to the benefit cap being applied. And I know my constituency office anyway, the COVID pandemic really exposed this. The COVID pandemic laid bare the harsh reality of 0-hour contracts for workers and their families. The difficulties these workers have faced during the pandemic has justified the need for these contracts to be banned as soon as possible. In its report on COVID clusters in occupational settings, the European Centre for Disease Prevention found that workers on precarious contracts were more at risk of presenting themselves to work while experiencing COVID symptoms. The lack of paid leave and uncertainty around their regular income was found to put them more at risk than workers on standard employment contracts if they were required to self-isolate. This was something which was also identified by the former First Minister Arlene Foster on the 14th September 2020, when she stated, "We know that some people, such as those who are on 0-hour contracts, will not have an income if they have to stay at home." And on top of this, these contracts have created precarious working arrangements which have led to stress and uncertainty for people. They make it difficult, if not impossible, for workers to manage their household budgets and make long-term financial commitments such as applying for a mortgage. As a result, I believe these contracts worsen in-work poverty, economic inactivity and financial anxiety. So my proposal to ban 0-hour contracts and replace them with banded hour contracts will mean that workers on shorter hour contracts will have a statutory entitlement to a banded hour contract if the number of hours that they have actually worked in the previous 3 months does not reflect their contracted hours. This banded hour contract will provide workers with a minimum and maximum number of weekly contracted hours. The legislation will set out 8 bands of weekly working hours as follows. So it starts 3 to 6, 6 to 11, 11 to 16, 16 to 21, 21 to 26, 26 to 31, 31 to 36 and 36 and over. This will benefit workers and families as it will provide them with greater certainty over their household incomes from week to week. And it will also be beneficial to employers and the wider economy as it will reduce high staff turnovers and regular recruitment costs by employers associated with precarious work. In practice, the bill will place a legislative duty on the employer to offer the banded contract after the employee has served a 3-month qualification period. It is optional for the worker to accept this contract, but once the worker accepts the contract, they must begin to work on this contract within a month of it being agreed. The employer must keep a record of offering the banded hour contracts to employees, whether they accept or not. And the worker can also request to be placed in a band of weekly working hours, which accurately reflects the hours they are doing, and after they make the request, the employer has 4 weeks to comply. In addition, the bill will also place a duty on the employer to pay workers 3 times the hourly minimum wage in cases where they would normally call the workers into work and then send them home without work or more meaningful compensation. The bill will also ban the use of contractual exclusivity clauses, which have been factored into employment contracts to prevent workers from looking for work elsewhere when they need more hours to bump up their earnings. So trade unions have said that they want to be proactive in enforcement and will pursue employers to enact this legislation, and the Labour Relations Agency will take on the role of conciliation and dispute resolution. Workers will also have the right to bring a claim to an industrial tribunal if an employer fails to place them in a band of weekly working hours. As is the norm, I carried out a 4-week consultation on the bill and received 478 responses. It showed that 93% of respondents agreed that zero-hour contracts should be banned from the labour market, while 90% agreed that the proposal to create banded hour contracts was a good way to achieve this. The banning of zero-hour contracts was part of the New Decade New Approach Agreement, which all parties in the executive signed up to. But despite this political consensus, consecutive economy ministers have failed to move on the issue. Also, as part of the process for bringing forward this proposal, I wrote to the Economy Minister, who at the time was Minister Dodds, and she confirmed that she did not intend to bring forward this banded hour contract proposal to resolve the issue. Similar legislation passed in the Oireachtas in the form of the Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Bill in 2017, and there is currently a PMB in progress in Westminster on this. So in the absence of legislation on the issue here, there is nothing to realistically prevent these contracts being used. And as I have said, I feel change on this is even more relevant and more necessary due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the precarious economic circumstances which workers and families now find themselves in. I am happy to take suggestions and questions from the committee, and I look forward to working with you in the time ahead.
Thank you, Jemma, for that overview. And as you've outlined, there is very broad support, I guess, for the banning of zero-hour contracts. It was one of the New Decade New Approach commitments in employment. And as you've said out, there hasn't been progress, I guess, from the department so far in moving forward with that. So I would appreciate, therefore, that this is the only piece of legislation that's going to move forward within the current mandate to bring about the ending of these contracts. Just, I suppose, if you could maybe talk us through a little bit more in respect of the consultation, how it was carried out and what the response to that was, and in particular organisations perhaps that you have engaged with around the bill and what their response to it has been.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. Yeah, so we carried out the 4-week consultation last October, between October and December last year, and as I said, the 90% of people agreed with the proposal of banded hour contracts, and we engaged with the women's sector heavily as well, and all of the trade unions on the island, and again, all in support of the proposal. The women's sector in particular emphasised how it's more than likely zero-hour contracts more than likely affect women more, just because of the nature of them and with care and responsibilities, etc. So, and then also, obviously, my constituency of Fermanagh and South Tyrone, we have a lot of food factories, and we engaged with them around that, around their workers. And in particular, I'll never forget the one conversation we had with a fella who had admitted that he had needed to self-isolate, but he couldn't afford it. So he just had to go to work. And then in the event he was off sick, he was afraid that he would lose his job because he had to take off sick. So there's some really harrowing stories that people are experiencing on these contracts, Chair. So did I answer your question there, or did I just waffle?
No, you answered my question, Jemma. Thank you. And I suppose just to pick up on your final point there, we do have as I understand it, the highest prevalence of zero-hour contracts or these type of precarious contracts, and also the kind of lower pay that goes along with it. And then there's the implications that has for the broader economy and what we know to be low levels of productivity, or the lowest levels of productivity in these islands. And there is a clear link between employees and workers' terms and conditions of employment, and then the impact on the economy, and I think that is one of the reasons why the move away from these contracts is necessary. You indicated, Jemma, I think in the course of your presentation, I think you said 11,000 people are known to be on zero-hour contracts, but the Labour Relations Agency had set out that was likely to be more. Do you have any indication of kind of what sort of numbers we're talking about in respect of that, and why there is the lack of clarity in respect of that? Is you spoke about some of the other kind of types of clauses that might be in employment contracts, or even I know the bogus self-employment issue is also in the mix in respect of some of this stuff. So if you maybe do you have any kind of sort of detail in relation to the general picture in respect of that?
No, I don't. And the Labour Relations Agency don't actually have it themselves, but they know that that it is larger, and they say that it's a lot to do with the definition of zero-hour contracts and how it's interpreted, and also, as you've mentioned, the bogus self-employment. So, they're taking it into a wider precarious working contracts issue, and they know that definitely it's larger. I did have the number of how many there is across these islands, but I don't have it to hand, Chair, so I can send it to you if you wish.
Yeah, that's great, Jemma. And then just a final point for me before I bring in a number of other members is in relation to, you mentioned the issue of enforcement and trade unions wanting to have a role in respect of that, and also the Labour Relations Agency having a role in respect of early conciliation. So could you maybe just speak to a wee bit further around how this legislation would actually be enforced?
Yeah, well, obviously we're hoping that there won't be any issues of it being enforced, but sometimes that is inevitable. So basically we would be encouraging workers to work with their trade union if there's any issues to report, and then to report that to the Labour Relations Agency, who both are happy to deal with it and take it on. And as I said, the Labour Relations Agency welcome this. Obviously, they know exactly the issues that it causes. And then, as I said, if this isn't resolved, if it does get to a position, workers are allowed then, or they do have the right to take it to an industrial tribunal. Obviously, we will be trying to avoid that, and we will be hoping so. But the other thing is employers have to, as I said, take a record of offering these contracts to workers. So in the event that a trade union does approach them, or the Labour Relations Agency does approach them, they have the proof there that they have been offering these contracts, if that's what the issue is. Okay,
thank you, Jemma. So I'm going to bring in other members. Mike is first up.
Chair, thank you, Jemma. Thank you very much indeed. And I just praising my words by saying instinctively supportive of what you're trying to achieve, but obviously we have to scrutinise. So tell me a bit more about the consultation. How was it actually done? Was it an online kind of survey monkey type?
Yeah, sorry, I know the chair asked me that and I forgot to answer. Unfortunately, it was online because of COVID. But we had a number of online meetings, and actually we met with the Zero Hour Justice group around it too, so a wide range of people, and we met with hoteliers in Fermanagh as well, so from businesses to the trade unions, there was a lot of ground covered.
Okay. What about the business organisations? What response from the Institute of Directors?
We actually didn't, I don't think we met with the Institute of Directors.
Okay, CBI?
CBI, I'm sorry, Pearse can correct me, but I think we did have a response from the CBI, Pearse, did we?
So just thanks, Mike, for offering initial support just to start. But so obviously we had put out the online consultation, as everyone does with all PMBs. That was open to CBI, other groups to respond. Unfortunately, at this stage, we haven't got any submissions from the CBI directly or the Institute of Directors. Although, as Jim has mentioned there, we met with an organisation in Britain, the Zero Hours Justice group, and they had indicated that CBI had been in touch with them to come on board with ideas around phasing out zero hours themselves, and sort of voluntary schemes that were happening in Britain on trying to provide workers more secure arrangements. So just hopefully that clarifies your point. So they hadn't engaged with us directly, but consultation was open to all groups to engage.
What about the Federation of Small Businesses?
No.
No.
Sorry.
No, just the same again. I mean, obviously, we have published this and sent this out to a variety of business groups. So again, those groups hadn't responded to the consultation directly, but we continue to seek engagement with them on the bill.
So from what I'm hearing, you chose to reach out to certain groups. How did you make that decision as to whom you were going to contact?
No, it was, as Pearse said, we put the consultation out on SurveyMonkey, and it was on social media and etc. So then we asked for them to approach us, and that's how we set up our meetings, was people coming to us to engage on the proposal, and that's where my link with the CBI was. So apologies for that, Mike. I remembered the zero-hour contracts. Justice Group had mentioned it.
So I'm sorry, Gemma, I'm slightly confused here. Did you reach out to groups or not?
We reached out to the trade unions,
Right.
and then on the back of the proposal and the consultation going live, the other groups then contacted us.
Okay. Is there a downside either for employers or any employee?
I don't see a downside to it, but I could be biased. You know, I think that as I said in my opening remarks, you know, it cuts down costs on recruitment for employers. It also incentivizes employees to be more loyal to their employer. And in terms of the employee, then it doesn't take away the flexibility that I know some people argue that zero-hour contracts provide, and then some workers might actually enjoy. It just provides more clarity and certainty for them over what hours they're going to be working and what wages they're going to be getting from week to week.
Yeah, get it. Are there any exemptions, or will this cover every transaction where one person pays another person a sum of money for an activity?
Well, if the person is working, if they've worked the hours for a period of 3 months, that's what our aim is. You know, so if they have worked, say they've worked 3 hours a week for a period of 3 months, we would be hoping that the employer would be offering them, they would actually be entitled then to an offer of a banded hour contract.
Let me try a scenario. Let's say there's a young couple with a child, and they want to go out on a Friday night for a meal and a movie, and they go to the neighbour's young daughter and say, will you look after our child? Is that a 0 hours contract?
That's more of a, that's a job for a teenager, you know, that I've done it as a teenager, you know, it's not something that you'd be dependent on as such. But if it's consistent and that's the way that the family want to work it and want to make it professional, then yeah, they will be entitled to being offered a banded hour contract.
Really?
Oh, Pearse is looking in there.
Sorry, Mike, just to clarify that, so, I mean, the bill essentially is directed towards workers and employees. I think the issue you're referring to is this sort of idea of bogus self-employment, or this idea where someone would be doing sort of a contract for service. Now, at the time of drafting the bill, we spoke to the drafters about that issue. that at this stage probably wouldn't be covered in the bill. This is very much about people who are workers and employees doing sort of errors that aren't reflected in an employment contract. So I think actually in clause 1 of the bill, it mentions that sort of point where it refers to this being workers and employees. So look, we're happy to take suggestions on those sorts of issues, and we can keep those under consideration. But for the purpose of this bill, it's essentially workers and employees.
Okay, that's helpful clarification. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Mike.
So here's, Jen, to clarify on that particular point, the bill, and I'm looking here at clause 1, and it refers to what a 0 hours worker is, and that therefore will be set out in terms of the general definition of a worker or an employee in terms of an employment contract.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So just moving on then to Peter. Can we bring Peter in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Gemma, for the briefing in relation. A few questions, both really just arising as well. Similar point to Mike. So you did a 4-week consultation. Now, again, probably is not somebody who, other than I think in one of the previous mandates, took over a PMB whenever it was at a slightly more advanced stage. Is 4 weeks not quite a short period to do consultation? Most, certainly from the point of view of anything where department is doing consultation, will quite often at least do minimum of 8 weeks, quite often 12 weeks. 4 weeks, and simply by survey, maybe seems quite a short period of time. First question.
That's, as far as I know, no, we were.
Sorry, I think you've misquoted there, Jim. It was 8 weeks of a consultation, and it was through SurveyMonkey as the standard procedure for PMBs. Just clarify that, Peter. And it was also, I know people have asked about the terms of engagement. This was generally the same procedure as other PMBs. The consultation was published on the Assembly website, so
well,
organisation.
Again, there's a bit of a difference between you told us a few minutes, maybe misspoke, whatever. There was a 4-week consultation. It's now 8 weeks in that regard on it. But I'm a bit concerned in terms of mention. I know Mike had referenced employers. I suppose a couple of things. Have you mentioned of FSB? But obviously, one of the areas. Have you met, for instance? Had any discussions with, say, Hospitality Ulster, or particularly, I mean, 0 hours contracts, I suppose one of the major uses of it will be in the hospitality sector in that regard. Have you had any meetings directly with organisations representing hospitality?
Sorry, Peter, that probably was my fault. I think I might have misspoke on the 4 weeks.
No, that's okay. We can all do it, Gemma. I understand that, yeah.
No, we haven't met with Hospitality Ulster as a whole, but as I said, we met with hoteliers in Fermanagh. They had approached me again, and they did have concerns, but they just, once we clarified the banded hours issue, and that, there'd be flexibility still there, only we're looking for more clarity and more certainty for workers. They were more or less welcoming of the bill. So not Hospitality Ulster as a whole, but hoteliers in Fermanagh. So,
well, I mean, yeah, and I appreciate there's at times that a lot of wisdom can come from Fermanagh, but it does seem a little bit strange that we're focused in, for example, I would probably make 2 points that representative organisations which are covering all of Northern Ireland, that there hasn't been direct, but I mean, it seems to be a little bit weaker point to say we've met just with a few local businesses effectively in that regard. But I'm also, do you not think there's a potential criticism there that in terms of where you've reached out, it seems to have been quite one-sided? So if we're talking about, I mean, you mentioned, for instance, the CBI, and essentially it was you met a group who are presumably effectively an organisation which would be quite strongly against the 0 hours contracts. What was the name of the group? Sorry, you met the 0 hours contract.
The 0 hour justice group.
I'm assuming the 0 hour justice group would be a group that would be reasonably hostile to 0 hours contracts. I don't know the group, but I'm guessing here in relation to that. And to effectively do the connection to the CBI is they've told you what they've said to the, like a second-hand opinion. And it does seem that, I think it's perfectly reasonable that you're reaching out to the likes of the trade unions or organisations such as that. But to do that on one side, but then not do it on the opposite side, because clearly there's important issues for employees and there's also important issues for employers. And it doesn't seem that that side of the equation in terms of where employers are, particularly in relevant industries, has been taken. I mean, how would you deal with sort of criticism just of that nature?
Yeah, well, that's fair enough, Peter. And actually, on the hoteliers in Fermanagh, one of them is representative of Hospitality Ulster. He engages, he sits on their board. But I'm not saying that he is speaking for Hospitality Ulster in our meeting. But that is a fair enough point. As I said, we did put the consultation out there, and maybe, if we wrote to trade unions, maybe we should have wrote to the FSB. But that's a suggestion we can take away.
Obviously, as well, I suppose, in terms of I'm thinking particularly the hospitality side of it, and I suppose all of us in terms of where we've been over the last couple of years. And I appreciate to some extent, both for good or ill, COVID has brought a lot of things into a certain level of focus in that regard. I think we'd all accept that. Do you not think there'd be a certain level of reluctance amongst the broader hospitality sector that, given sort of where we are with COVID, given that frankly none of us know precisely what the way forward will be as new variants potentially emerge, the hospitality sector, has probably been under more pressure than most sectors within the economy, but also as it moves ahead, it's likely to be a lot more sort of potentially volatile as we and it may be difficult at times for the hospitality sector to know what provisions it's going to be making to some extent a month or two ahead in that regard. I suppose that the other issue is in terms of the qualification, just to clarify a couple of points on the qualification period for the banded contracts. If we're talking about 3 months, is that a 3 month period where it's like a continuous 3 month period? Or if, for example, you had, I suppose just in terms of the drafting side of this, if you have a company which uses uses 0 hour contract worker X, and they use them in April and then maybe used in, say, sort of July and August, for instance, on that basis, is it sort of accumulated 3 months or is it consecutive 3 months, or how is that just interpreted on that basis?
Yeah, so I'll take your last question first. It's a consecutive 3 months, and if it does, so it's a consecutive 3 months if the worker has been working. Say,
on that basis, on it, I know you mentioned about that there would be a certain level of advantage that it would create a greater level of potential loyalty of the employee to a particular employer, and I can see where the logic of that. But if we take maybe employers who, either because of circumstances or because they are a bit more cavalier about the way the system operates, what's to stop them on the flip side being less loyal to their employee? I mean, if people suddenly then get a qualified right through being for 3 consecutive months, what's to stop employers effectively rotating what are casual staff and doing sort of doing sort of casual work with an employee for a couple of months, then bringing in some other casual employees for the next couple of months, then going back to some of the originals, so that actually the people, they don't create the 3 month period on it. And it strikes me that those are, to some extent, there's almost an argument that you're making that it's potentially made easier for those employers who are going to be very casual over their attitude towards potential employees, as opposed to those who actually have a much more structured and better relationship potentially with their employees.
So you're basically talking about employers abusing the 3 month qualification period, is that it, Peter?
Yeah, abusing maybe is a bit of a strong word, because actually speaking, what they would be doing would be following what's there in terms of the legal position. If we're saying there's a trigger mechanism that and I can understand that if you're going to have a banded bid, you need a sort of a bank of information to which you can then apply that particular criteria. But if an employer comes to the conclusion, for instance, that this route is one that more ties their hands, they want greater levels of flexibility or whatever, to some extent does it not encourage them effectively almost to be slightly more casual in their approach to employees and potentially to treat them on a much shorter term basis on it?
Well, look, unfortunately, there will always be employers who try to get around this. There's employers will always try to get around some workers' rights legislation, but this legislation has been in place in the South and has worked well, and it closes some loopholes that currently exist. So that would be how we would see it.
And again, I wouldn't be an expert in contract law or employment law, but obviously contract law doesn't, for a contract to exist between two people, doesn't necessarily need to be at least in general, doesn't need to be a sort of a written contract in that regard. Taking, I suppose, where the qualification, but Mike had raised the example of the effectively the babysitter who's, I can put it that way, who was, facilitating the young couple if they were doing it effectively as a one-off on that regard. But I suppose, have you explored up in terms of what counts as a worker, so that takes Mike's example, say you have the couple with their child, they are going to the 17-year-old who effectively lives 2 doors down to do the babysitting, but instead of it just being in Mike's example, here's the one Friday night where they're going to the cinema, say as part of that you had a couple who decided, well, actually, as part of our thing, we have our date night will be that every Friday night we go to the cinema or head out. We will effectively every Friday night employ so-and-so just down the street, and effectively it's on the basis there's no formal contract of employment in terms of a written contract, but you would have a situation where each week for 3 hours a week that particular neighbour provides that service. Would that be something that would be under the thing, or is it just, to take the example, the differentiation between the much more casual arrangement that was maybe sort of outlined by Mike?
Yeah, well, clause 1 of the bill defines the worker and the type of work that we'd be covering in this. I don't think your example would really be one that would be come under this, Peter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the point in terms of what a contract of employment is. As I said, a contract, I mean, look, all of us, I suppose, as MLAs, we will have, and it's very well regulated through the Assembly, we will have, for all our staff, we will have direct contracts of employment in which there is, everything is written, it is very explicit. But again, and look, it may well be that maybe as part of this, maybe as a committee, we maybe need to get a little bit of direct legal advice. I'm aware that possibly with the exception of contracts involving land, the contracts can, one of the things you're taught very early in contract law is a contract can be inferred or indeed reached without it necessarily having to be something that's explicitly written down, and again, sort of on that side of things. Final point, just wanted to check. I'm just trying to see what I picked up. I didn't immediately see it. You mentioned, I think, in your introduction about a sort of a compensation if somebody was for instance hired and then, if you like, the employer at a particular point, or saying a thing, well, actually we're not giving you the 6 hours or whatever it is this particular month, and then I think, did you say that it would be the employee or the banded person would then be compensated? Was it at 3 times the? Just if you just run that, the detail of that just again.
Yeah, so Peter, that's to avoid people being called in at short notice and then not being given any work. So obviously it's an inconvenience if nothing else, but obviously people are paying money on travel costs, etc., to get into work, and then to be told when you get there that, no, sorry, we actually don't need you anymore, go home. So we have then they would be entitled to the 3 hour or the 3 times the hourly wage then.
Just in terms of the 3 hours, the minimum wage, how did you kind of settle on that as a sort of form of compensation? Because also potentially, particularly if you're looking at what is essentially casual work, generally speaking, it's not often particularly high paid work on that basis. It seems that potentially, and obviously from the point of view, I appreciate there's a high level of inconvenience for the employee who's been brought in, but it also potentially could be quite punitive on the employer. Is that maybe not going to be a level of deterrent to the employer to actually bring people in that regard? It will cut down sort of a level of casual work.
Well, that was kind of the point. We were hoping that employers wouldn't do this, that they wouldn't.
But to some extent, Jemma, is the way then that employers might well interpret that is we might need, for the sake of argument, we might need Mike or Matthew in tonight to help us out. But if we don't need them, we're going to have to pay quite a high rate for them. I tell you what, we'll just try and struggle through, and Mike and Matthew, actually they won't get the work. There's a potential, there seems to be a certain level of jeopardy on both sides of that in terms of the where that's been pitched.
Okay, yeah, I see where I see where you're coming from. But the point of this bill is to kind of, as I said, create this certainty. And
okay, look,
sorry,
I think probably more making a point in that regard. Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, thanks, Peter.
All right.
Thanks, Peter. And if we bring Matthew in next, please.
Thank you. Thanks, thanks, Jemma. Just on the question about, I guess, what it means for very small business. I think there is a, very strong arguments. It's very clear evidence that very large businesses, Sports Direct springs to mind, have abused 0-hour contracts and also spurious self-employment, and obviously, of course, the gig economy and the growth of Uber and various other delivery driver roles is something that we've all, certainly I have been shocked by over the last number of years. But I mean, I guess to further what Peter was saying, there will be questions about the very small hospitality business, for example, 0 hours contracts in which people work for a few hours on a Saturday afternoon in a pub. How would you foresee that change? So how would you foresee, for example, the person who works for a few hours a week in a rural pub? It might be a it shouldn't be someone under 18, obviously, if they're working in a pub, but it might be a student, and it might be and it might be it might be someone who does something else during the week, and it's a bit of extra cash for them, and they're relatively satisfied with the casual nature of it. Now, how does this bill ensure that for very small businesses like the rural pub, for example, that it's just not there's not huge increased burdens for them?
Thank you, Matthew. No, so there's two parts to answer. So this won't stop the flexibility of a job or of someone working in a rural pub on a Saturday afternoon. Like a student, if they're working, say, 3 to 6 hours every Saturday afternoon in a pub, they can be put in the 3 to 6 hour band. Okay. So, and it shouldn't be any extra cost to the employer because they're paying them anyway. Yeah. And also, if the employer has to offer them the contract after 3 months, so as I said, they don't have to accept it. It's just the obligation is on the employer after every 3 months to offer it. So if the student or whoever it is, or someone trying to bump up their wages working in a pub on a Saturday, they have to be offered the contract, but they don't have to accept it.
And would they be? Does the bill would mean that from day one, so they could start work. Basically, it's a 3 month grace period. Afterwards, it has to be there has to be a degree of formality. So the person doing the 5 hours a week on a Saturday afternoon can do that and be paid, but they it's after 3 months that it has to be on a contractual basis.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Do you see? How would you see the? How would you see the kind of consultation with? Obviously, a couple of questions about consultation with some of. I'm particularly interested in the small business side and how it would be communicated to small business, because I completely agree that there is a huge problem with 0 hour contracts that needs to be addressed, and so I'm very supportive of the intention of the bill to deal with it. I suppose my question would just be around the micro businesses and reassuring them that this isn't going to be burdensome? How would you go about approaching that?
Well, as I've said, this isn't going to change the wages or anything that these small businesses are paying these employees. There's no extra cost. They'll still be paying the wages. And I just think as well, the argument that whenever we first initially, take this for an example, we first initially were meeting with the hoteliers in Fermanagh, they were a wee bit wary of it. But once I explained the banded hour issue, they became more on board, because they realise that it's not taking away the flexibility that all these businesses want, and it's just, again, creating the certainty, and it's not any extra cost on them. It's just probably just taking extra notes every 3 months that they've offered this contract to their employees.
What do you think, just out of interest in sort of research around this bill, what are the worst sectors in terms of abusive zero-hour contracts here?
That's a good question. I don't want to be getting anybody into trouble, but I would have said the food industry, but I don't want to be quoted on that. So,
You mean food processing and manufacturing?
Your live feed.
I can. Seems plausible. Thank you.
all right, Matthew, thank you.
And can we bring Claire in then to the spotlight, please?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gemma. I suppose generally I would say I'm somewhat supportive of what you're trying to do. I suppose a lot of it, as we've already heard, is in respect of the detail around this and how this will play out practically, and if there's more that we need to do, to strengthen the various clauses of the bill. And sorry to kind of labour the point. I will kind of pick up on what others have said in relation to what constitutes an employee or a worker, and at what point, I suppose to give you even other examples as well, is it a contracted service rather than an employment contract, and at what point would it be considered that, if it is a consistent type of service that's being offered, so just to even give you an example, it was one that popped into my head, not the babysitting one, but I have a lady who walks my mother's dog, and she's going to do that on a regular basis, and she's going to I suppose and for her, that is her business. That is her kind of way that she gets her income. So it's not just an informal arrangement like a babysitting job on a Friday night, which for some could actually be their income too, and it could be their informal business. So I suppose when we talk about formal and informal, will that be actually defined in the law so that there won't be any ambiguity when we're trying to implement or apply this? And even to bring it to the point in relation to the hospitality sector, there are people who are self-employed within the hospitality sector who will, for example, will work for maybe one hotel one evening, will maybe work for a restaurant another evening. So I suppose, how do we define that to ensure that there is kind of clear blue water between contracted services and a contract of employment? And if that contract of employment isn't there, is it almost a default position that there's a basic statutory one? And how do we cover, what you're trying to do in those various things?
Thanks for that, Claire. Yeah, I understand the bogus self-employment thing, and that is something that we would have wanted to tackle in this mandate, but unfortunately, obviously with time constraints, etc., we couldn't do it. But we felt that the tackling the zero-hour contracts was a stepping stone, basically, to tackle some precarious work out there. In terms of your dog walker example, now I might have picked this up wrong, but this woman's self-employed, basically, is it?
I'm assuming so, because she walks people's dogs, she charges them per hour, and that would be considered her income. So is that, if she was to do that on a regular basis, if that was to become more consistent, for example, even to the point that it has a set day and a set time, at what point does that then be considered her as an employee, or at what point, or is she just, contracting her services? And I would imagine that she's doing all the things that she has to in relation to, declaring her income and all of that. I suppose, I know we look at these things on an informal basis, but at some point it might become more formal for that individual to the point that they are having to declare things and all of that. So will they be entitled to the various things that, I suppose other employees or workers are? I think, just others have raised it, and it is an interesting point, and it is that difference between, I suppose, employee and worker and someone who does this on a contracted basis, if you know what I mean. Because obviously, if it's contracted services, again, it'll be up to that individual to kind of manage their benefits and rights and all of that type of thing. But at what point does it cross over? Maybe it doesn't. It just occurred to me when it was raised by Mike and Peter and Matthew that actually maybe there's something that we need to do here so that people aren't taking advantage of that. And sadly, right, you mentioned it yourself. People will always try and take advantage of these things, but isn't that why you're trying to do this in the first place? So yeah, I just be keen to know that the crossover that, and like in fairness, like if you don't have an answer to that today, maybe come back to the committee on that. But you're right, and I suppose to even quote one of your colleagues earlier the week in relation to another debate, maybe there isn't enough time in this mandate to take this forward. Maybe it is too complicated, and maybe the intention is there, but maybe we, in order to get this right, we have to give ourselves more space in the next mandate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Pearse is looking in there on your question.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because it has obviously been raised a few times. I think we touched on it at the start, Jemma. This was obviously something we discussed with the Bill's office in terms of this contract for service issue, which is outside the scope of like workers, employees at the minute. It's something that's come up in England in terms of like Deliveroo. I know Matthew mentioned a couple of examples, and it's something that was actually discussed in, I think it was the Supreme Court recently. What is a worker? Because there are people who go week to week doing those contracts for service. The issue for us in this bill is trying to end 0 hour contracts, and it's, for workers and employees as things stand. For Jemma to create a new definition of worker within this would only, I'm just trying to play this out. So if we were to do contracts for service within this, those people would still miss out on things like maternity leave, sick pay. This would only deal with one aspect of employment law, which is a 0 hour contract. Yeah. So that exact issue, Claire, is very important. I know Jemma, strong views on it as well, but just logistically, it can't be included within this bill because it would require, a wider look at employment law. It would be better to do within an employment bill as such, where you can look at that definition of contract for service. So hopefully that clears that issue because I know it's been raised a few times.
I'm not sure if it clears it, but what I would say is by taking this bill forward, and if it potentially were to become law, would that compromise any kind of future kind of consideration we would have around that wider conversation that that we do need to have in relation to this? I suppose I wouldn't want to find myself in a position where we end up creating an issue by doing something like this, despite there being a good intention around this. But I think it is an important point, and maybe we do need to look at it more in terms of what this means, and for future proofing any other types of policy change, perhaps. Another question, I can't remember it. I did raise it when I was saying the first time, but I can't remember what the second one was. No, sorry, beg your pardon.
No, thank you, Claire. And look, if it does come to you, let me know. Drop me an email or whatever.
All right, thank you, Jemma. Thanks, Pearse.
Mr. O'Neill is now taking over the chair, and Mr. Dixon is next to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jemma, for this, and like others, generally very supportive of the intention of your bill. Could you maybe just briefly talk us through where your bill is different from the Small Business Enterprise Employment Act 2015, which amended the Employment Rights Act in the UK, and maybe we could have a little discussion about why that was not implemented here by the department. But if you just outline the main differences between the legislation in the rest of the United Kingdom and here. And your bill, sorry, not well, we know what the difference is between the rest of the UK and here. What we want to understand is the difference between the legislation of the UK and your bill.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm going to hand you over to Pearse on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's a very specific piece of legislation you referenced, Stuart. I mean, we'd obviously went through the Assembly research on this, and just from memory, that piece of legislation wasn't referenced to Jemma and myself, so we're happy to go away and look at that piece of legislation, the difference. But I know that as far as reports and stuff, we've looked at the Taylor Review in Britain, looked at the issue of zero-hour contracts and identified unfairness with them. As far as we understand it, there's no legislation in Britain at the minute, maybe you can correct us on that, that bans zero-hour contracts or creates banded hour contracts. I think there is legislation on things like exclusivity clauses, which is something that's obviously included in this bill and would end these exclusivity clauses. So if you want to elaborate on that one, Stuart, I mean, I just have to confess that in the research that we have done and the research the Assembly Library, that piece of legislation didn't come up, I'm afraid.
Okay, yeah, it's just that our understanding is that there were some legislative changes made in the rest of the UK that weren't enacted here. They could have presumably been done by an LCM or by legislation brought forward by the department. What interaction did you have with the department over your bill? And can we look at the area as to why the department didn't bring forward legislation of their own and why it was necessary for a private member's bill?
Yeah, well, as I said, I wrote, to the Minister at the time, and I have put in subsequent written questions asking, will this be enacted, or what's your position on zero-hour contracts? And at the time, Minister Dodds had said that there was no intention to bring forward banded hour contracts in this mandate, and as to why it hasn't happened since, I don't know. But we were always, it was always our intention to ban zero-hour contracts. So we were happy to take forward a PMB if the department wasn't willing to move on it. So that's probably a question for the department, Stuart, more than me. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Just finally, then, what do you believe the costs will be if your legislation were introduced?
Well, I have a figure from the Deliberations agency, which is £276,000, but that has to come with a health warning, because the Labour Relations Agency were asked by the Assembly Research Team for a figure, and that's the figure they gave. But they're not convinced that this level of finance will actually be needed for their compliance role. So it's a bit confusing, I understand, Stuart, but that's what the Labour Relations Agency told us about a fortnight or 3 weeks ago. So,
I probably don't expect you to be able to answer this, but we've been recently grappling with an issue around HMRC costs for changes to employment legislation. Are you aware of are there any potential HMRC costs for these changes?
I'm not aware, Stuart, but we could try to find out for you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Keith next. Keith?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jemma and Pearse. I just have sort of one, maybe two questions relating to a worker. So if a worker is in a band after the 3 month, say they're in the 3 to 6 hour band, and they do overtime, so therefore they're working 7 hours. So the broad question, Jemma, is regarding overtime and what's defined as overtime, and does the same apply that if, say, the worker has to do 7 hours for 2 weeks in a row, for example, do they get an overtime rate? So what's your thoughts on the overtime pay rate?
Yeah, so this doesn't stop employees from doing overtime, Keith. It permits it, but for the sake of clarity, the bill gives workers the choice to work additional hours, provided that they get paid the overtime rate and that they get in accordance with the overtime pay arrangements.
So if a worker's inside whatever band, Jemma, 3 to 6, 6 to 11, if they go over that on 1 week, they will expect on this bill to get overtime rate for working outside their technically, which is their contract. Is that my understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I presume then at that point the employers, say for example the worker's doing 8 hours for a few weeks, it's up to the employer or possibly the employee, but probably more in the interests of the employer to say we want to move you into a different band because it could be cheaper for the employer.
Well, they have to be doing those hours for a period of 3 months.
Okay, fair enough. And just two other final points if I may, Chair. The bottom of page 5, line 37, 38, it says nothing in this part requires an employer to offer hours of work in a week where, and it says B, the employer's regular business is not being carried out. What's the definition of regular business? Because obviously we're in, is the regular business, you're not of a takings of 10,000 a week, you're closed 1 day a week. The definition of regular business can be very broad, and that could be to the detriment, Jemma, to the employee and not the employer. You know my point? It's just a thing.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't expect an answer. It's just a thing I spotted. The definition of regular business could be to the detriment of the employee.
Yes, no, I know what you mean. That is a good point. But we wouldn't expect that to be obviously every week. That would be an exceptional circumstance.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt there, but thought it occurred to me, what if we're looking at regular work, if we take, because I think it's one of the areas that has potential for most volatility, but in terms of the broader hospitality industry, because they may or may not face particular levels of restrictions at different stages on it. Is it sort of, if they are under considerable restrictions, is that regular work, or is there any kind of thought of definition there?
Yeah, so if, say for example, there was restrictions on the hospitality sector, that wouldn't be their regular work, if you know what I mean. If, say, there was a lockdown or something again, that wouldn't be their regular work.
Keith, did you further question?
Just one final one, then that's definitely done, Chair. You referred to food industry, and I worked in the food industry in your constituency for 22.5 years. A lot of the food processors would use agency staff, and obviously that gives them a degree of flexibility because orders can go up and down. But generally, the processor themselves, anybody they employ, generally employs people on a fixed contract, 37 hours, 40 hours, whatever it is. Do you see this being a big issue for agency staff, and that's across the board, whether it's food processing or whatever? Because agencies, the degree of them is the flexibility. So would you say it's the agency staff's the issue, or not the staff, but the employer, should I say?
No, Keith. And as I said, I wasn't attacking the food industry there. But no, this would still apply to agency staff. This, the offer of a banded hour contract would still apply to agency staff. And look, as I said before, it doesn't take away the flexibility of their contract. It just would create more certainty for them. And also, remember, they don't have to accept the offer of the banded hour contract. They can stay on their agency contract if they wish.
Okay, thanks, Jemma. Pearse, thanks, Chair.
Chair, just finally, Mr. Nesbitt wants back in.
Okay, Mike, sir.
Yeah, Jemma, this is a question in terms of the bill at 112J, entitlement to banded weekly working hours. Now, you have 8 bands, and my question is this. Let's say I'm the employer and you're the worker. I'm offering you band A, but actually every week you're doing more than between 6 and 11 hours, and you should actually be in band B. How do you rectify that?
So it's basically the worker is in the wrong band. Is that what you're saying, Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as an employer, it's easy for me to say, I'm going to put you in band A because that limits my commitment, even though I know I'm going to use you 2 or 3 times as much as band A. So,
well, in that case, then the employee puts in writing. If the employee, obviously the employee has to move up a band, they have to put in writing to the employer that they request to be moved up a band, and that's the employee. The employer then has 4 weeks to comply with that request.
and if I don't?
That's unfortunately where the trade unions and the Labour Relations Agency would have to get involved. That's the enforcement and the compliance end of it then. And that's the whole point as well around the employer keeping a record of the offering the banded hour contract and the employee keeping proof of it.
So basically it goes to law to the extent that you go into the LRA.
Well, if this bill passes and they're breaking the law, well, unfortunately that's the way it would have to go.
Chair, just on that,
Okay.
on that point.
That's clear. I mean, I think at paragraph 2 in 112J you make that clear that If it doesn't reflect the number of hours worked per week, then there's an issue that ultimately goes to the Labour Relations Agency. Peter.
Yeah, sorry, just on a similar point, what about the situation of, which again maybe a thing of particular jobs or industries which are quite seasonal in their nature? So to take an example on it, somebody might have, for example, done their 3 months, say between March and May, but because of the nature of whatever the employer is doing, it's something which there's much more of a spike during the holiday periods, June to August in that regard. And I suppose in terms of the banding, but what's the level of flexibility if we're taking, not so much that if there's a very deliberate attempt by the from the employer to keep somebody down, but more on the basis of actually there'll be a considerable, much more need for a short-term period of time? What's the position there, just?
So are you saying, Peter, say for example someone works 3 hours a week from March to May and then the employer increases their hours then during the summer, is that it?
Yeah, it may be that what you find is that because of seasonal side of things, that you may find with a particular, but yeah, they will need to take on additional hours for a period of time for a couple of months or whatever, but will then find actually once, say, the summer holidays are out of the way, that actually it would drop off again. There'd be a lot less need, but probably their qualifying period might be in the run up to the summer, but you end up a spike during the summer. I mean,
Yeah, so if it's 3 months, so say it is March to May, they should be placed in a band. And then if their hours are increased over the summer, but it's not 3 months, then they wouldn't be placed in a band, unfortunately.
All right, okay.
Okay.
No further questions.
No further questions. Okay, in that case, thanks Jemma and thanks Pearse for coming and giving us evidence. I'm sure we'll be talking about it more, particularly when it comes to second stage debate. So thank you for that. I don't know if there are any specific actions. I think we've had a good fulsome session.
Sure. The only thought occurred to me, I don't know, this might be helpful ahead of second stage as well, goes to the principal. I don't know whether either through assembly research or through legal advice, there does seem to be, in the broader sense, it may be helpful to the committee if we got some level of advice on what constitutes contracts for employment, who would fall under that side of things on it, because it does seem, I mean, I know we bandied about a few examples in that regard, it does seem a little bit of a grey area as to what the scope will be in relation to that. It may be useful if we maybe had that information as a committee.
Okay, can I ask, Clerk, would that be something we could ask Grace to do for us?
That's legal advice we can ask for. If members are content, we'll go ahead and seek legal advice on what exactly constitutes a contract, what kind of work constitutes a contract. Yeah. Mr. Weir had highlighted there's the actual contract or there's the inferred contract, but it's, I suppose, how far that can go.
Yeah, and if we're looking at what constitutes a worker as opposed to simply here is a service being provided, as to, you know, where the...
There's a difference between contract of services and contract for services.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Clerk. In that case, thank you, Jemma, and thank you, Pearse. And obviously, once the second stage is complete, assuming we pass the second stage, and there is a committee stage, we will have a survey and a list of stakeholders to get ready for committee stage. And I'm sure you will be we'll be hearing from you again should that happen, Jemma and Pearse. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Jemma. Okay, agenda item 5 then, members, is the small scale green energy bill. Sorry, before we do that, Mike.
I think it would be appropriate if we were to contact some of the business organisations, not least the Federation of Small Businesses.
Chair, if it's helpful, that's literally on our plan. We have a plan already set up for once committee stage starts. So we have a survey planned, and we would write direct to all of the business groups, plus all the other stakeholders that have already been mentioned, all the sectors, particularly where this is an issue, the hospitality sector, tourism sector, etc., as well as putting out our own citizen space survey. So we'll bring that list back once we get an indication that it will move to committee.
Chair, agriculture will be another area, particularly just following off. I think there's a lot of very seasonal work in agriculture.
Yeah. Okay. If that answers your Question, Mike. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a departmental briefing from the Department of Economy on the small-scale green energy bill. I would refer members to the Clerk's memo at page 51 on this session, and also the departmental response at page 57. That's the departmental response on the small-scale green energy bill. So we have with us today Joe Reynolds. Joe, do you want to introduce your team and make a, well, we have, I should say for the record, we have Joe Reynolds, who's Director of Energy Consumers Branch at DFE, Peter Russell, Director of Energy Consumers Branch at DFE. Are they joint and in the same role?
Chair, I'm not sure that we have them all. If Mr. Reynolds just lets us know who's there.
Joe, yes, do you want to tell us who's with you?
Thank you for the invitation to attend, contribute to your considerations this morning. As you say, I'm Joe Reynolds. I am, from this week, I'm Director of Energy Strategy. We've had to do some reorganisation within Energy Group this week, following a change of personnel within the department. I'm accompanied this morning by Dr. Koichi Samuels, who's from the Renewable Electricity team, which was reporting to me up until this week, and will report to Peter Russell from today onwards.
Okay. Great.
Maybe if I start by setting out some initial thoughts, and then I'll try to answer any questions that you may have.
That would be good. Well, first of all, congratulations, Joe, on your appointment. You may get a question or two about at least the timing, I would imagine, of the energy strategy from members, given you've rather invited us to ask you that question, given what you've just told us. But congratulations on your role, and thank you, Dr. Samuels, as well. Yeah, so if you could give us an opening statement. You obviously provided a helpful written briefing. If you could give us an opening statement, then we'll bring members in for questions.
I suspect there may be a wide range of subjects that you might want to ask me questions about, but we'll focus on small-scale green energy for now. As I stated in the written response in August, whilst the intentions behind the bill are themselves laudable, the department would not support its progression. At first principles, we fail to grasp the policy objective that the bill seeks to deliver. And without policy, there is a risk that legislation becomes a blunt instrument to drive operational outcomes that fail to take a whole system view. Electricity is delivered by a combination of generation, transmission, distribution and supply, and this bill focuses on generation alone. It affords value to generation, but it says nothing about consumption. It is silent on the other aspects of the delivery chain. And as the committee is aware, the department does hope very soon to publish a new energy strategy, which aims to achieve the net zero carbon emissions from the energy sector by 2050, whilst maintaining affordability and security of supply. In that context, all the low carbon solutions, microgeneration, small and large scale renewables, energy efficiency, smart technologies, they should all be considered, but in the round. The strategy will be supported by a schedule of policy development that will inevitably lead to the identification of policy levers to give effect to the policies and to deliver the strategic goals. The committee has already heard, as it considered the strategy development earlier with my colleagues, Richard Rogers, Thomas Byrne, that we anticipate potentially significant proposals for energy legislation during the next mandate and indeed beyond that. So whilst it is premature to speculate on the detailed contents of a forthcoming strategy, the process has been grounded in evidence, and that includes the Northern Ireland Energy Transition Model, a programme of research between the department and leading experts in the field. The officials in the department have worked with interested parties, and I know you've taken evidence from the regulator, the system operator, the network operator, and consumers themselves and their representatives to identify the areas for development and future challenge. The strategy, more especially its subsequent action plan, will set out how the department sees these issues being addressed as we move towards net zero. It's clear that a growth in renewables will be an important component in what will be needed. This strategy is founded on the principles of decarbonisation, digitalisation, decentralisation and democratisation. And whilst this bill can purport to support those principles, in particular decarbonisation and the promotion of green energy, it does not explain how it would mesh with the other necessary requirements to deliver affordability and security of supply. There is no policy direction to define the extent to which a scheme designed under this legislation would promote generation for supply rather than for consumption, the so-called prosumer approach. nor how to balance between those ends as they would be achieved. Specifically, there is no attribution of costs between generation, connection, distribution and supply. Consumers without subsidised generation could potentially be bearing the costs of micro generators without enjoying any of the benefits. Increased levels of intermittency would almost inevitably increase the reliance on balancing markets, which can be the most expensive component of the final wholesale price. The urge to increase multiple micro connections may also add to the cost and risk reliance on the thermal plant that would be required to maintain base loads. In short, significantly more micro connection could increase costs and risk security of supply. In Northern Ireland, Power NI already provides a micro generation export tariff annually approved by the utility regulator, which any active consumer can already avail of. Therefore, micro generators have a choice and a route to market. Recent Ulster University research indicates in Northern Ireland it is the more affluent consumer that can participate in micro generation, whilst low income and vulnerable consumers face barriers. Under the proposals in this bill, there is a risk that we would see low income households pay more on their electricity bills to enable higher income consumers to save on theirs. Support for this bill would be counter to the evidence-based approaches. This could leave the department legally bound to develop a scheme that would reduce price competitiveness, requiring more expensive generation with lower levels of reliability. The department would readily be open to criticism, and it would risk the repeat of mistakes from the past. The inclusion of what I'm calling an escape hatch clause betrays the proposer's fear that any scheme is likely to quickly display unwelcome outcomes. In any case, it's superfluous, given the department's commitments to both recent public inquiries and the Public Accounts Committee recommendations, requiring such options to be included in future scheme design. Legislation must have an evidence base. However, the impacts of the bill towards cost to the consumer and on the power system remain unknowns. The bill writes a blank cheque for decarbonisation without regard to who pays or how much they pay for reliability and economy. Any scheme developed under the proposed legislation could increase costs, reduce reliability, therefore reduce security of supply, and ultimately increase emissions through a reliance on a higher level of base load thermal generation. Given these fundamental concerns, I advise the committee that this bill, if passed, would legislate on an idea that is not proven and lead to a risk of damaging effects on the consumer and the power system in Northern Ireland. In conclusion, the bill threatens to impose a duty on the department to create a scheme based on a policy that is not tested, to generate outcomes that are unknown, and to compel instability on an aspect of the critical infrastructure that is necessarily judged for its dependability. I'm happy to take any questions, although from the outset I have to say neither Koichi nor I are engineers nor economists.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That was it. We can say at least that was a fairly definitive departmental. You didn't hedge your bets, which that's I think a fair statement. So, but one of the statements you made, Joe, was that significantly more microgeneration could increase costs, and I think you also said potentially affect supply. Now, that seems like you're basically quite down on the principle of increased microgeneration, not just increased microgeneration as provided for in this draft bill, but microgeneration in general. Is that wrong?
That is wrong. I'm sorry if I gave that impression.
Okay.
I think microgeneration is valuable in itself, and I think that is one of the objectives that is laudable in what's being proposed. In fact, when I look at the text of the bill, I know that in the scope of the bill on the opening page, it references the establishment of a scheme to promote the microgeneration. I'm not keen on the establishment of a scheme. I think promoting microgeneration is a good thing, but I think we need to go through a process whereby we identify the objectives we're trying to achieve, we put in place a policy, and then we identify which policy levers, whether they are legislative or financial or otherwise, that we would seek to put in place to bring forward an increase in microgeneration.
Okay, and one of the points that's been made, if microgeneration is, if that is a policy aim, one of the things we've heard from the department elsewhere is that, and indeed actually more obviously from the sector, i.e. from people like Power NI, is that they'd rather this was part of a broad-based energy strategy. But the truth is, we don't think, I'm not asking you to give too much, well, you can give it away if you want, it doesn't. The energy strategy is not going to mandate a new legislative incentive for microgeneration, or indeed a legislative basis for expanded renewables generation generally, is it? It's going to be a strategy, not a legislative package.
It's a strategy which will then require to be followed by a package of different policy initiatives, and those policies will have to be brought forward, consulted upon, developed, not least with the committee, but also more broadly with stakeholders and consumers generally, to see how we approach the development of that. It's clear that if we're going to achieve the net zero targets, we're going to need a significant increase in the amount of renewables on the system. What I wanted to say in my opening comments was that some part of that will be by microgeneration. We don't need a legislative command to bring forward greater microgeneration. There is already a route to market. There are already tariffs in place. I know you've heard from Power NI, from NIE Networks, from others who've made these points. It's difficult to see what the benefit of this legislation would be that adds to the system that's already in place. We need increased renewables, and we need to go through a policy process to identify the balance between small scale, large scale, and microgeneration in order to achieve that.
One of the arguments that's been made to us by an academic is that the principles of the bill are broadly welcome, but he too shared some of your concern around potential, I guess, distributional effects, and the fact that you would effectively be more well off. People who are able to install microgeneration might be benefiting in a sense at the expense of lower income households. Would it be, should the bill pass, should the bill go, we're in committee stage now, but would it not be, would the bill be more palatable if there was an amendment measure, there were amendment measures to as it were, broaden the not so much broaden the scope as in allow lower income households to all install microgenerators, but something which slightly mitigated the distributional effect. Is that something you think that would you be more supportive of the bill? Is what I'm trying to say. If there was, for example, amendments in that regard. Or is it just the principles of the bill that you just think it's not?
The bill legislates to bring forward a scheme, and some of the questions you're asking about what the content of the scheme would be. What I'm suggesting is that if we don't know what the content of the scheme would be, we probably ought not to legislate to make it a requirement that we have one. That's a process that would follow if the if the bill were to become law. I think those are good questions. I think those questions need to be answered before you decide that the way to answer those questions and to put those answers into effect would be by some legislative measure.
One final question before I bring colleagues in. Would there not be an argument for putting down the principle of creating a new microgenerated scheme in law, and then possibly through amendment ensuring that there was enough time for that scheme to commence, that gave the department time to publish an energy strategy and design a scheme that was consistent with the broader energy strategy and dealing with some of the issues? Is that not one? Would that not be a plausible alternative?
I'm still not clear what objective you're trying to achieve. Are we trying to achieve an increase just in microgeneration, percentage-wise, for its own sake? It's already there. It's already a significant part. Not a significant part. It's about 2.5% if we don't count the zero export. It's about nearly 4% already of generation capacity in Northern Ireland. The bill suggests maybe we should think about, I know Mr. O'Dowd has spoken before about maybe hitting 5%. We're pretty close to that. The options are there. There's nothing to prevent people from installing microgeneration facilities. The difficulty in the research that you referred to from Ulster University, funny, I was looking at the beginning of the week again, and it suggests that it is more affluent people, perhaps MLAs and civil servants who can afford to install these things. I'm not sure why we need to incentivise them to do that. They can do that at present. But if we did it through some sort of a publicly funded scheme, then certainly following on past practice, it's likely that the cost of that would then be distributed amongst all bill payers. So disproportionately, lower income families would be making a contribution to their electricity bills to pay for perhaps people like you and me putting solar panels on our roof. That doesn't seem to be a sensible way to go forward.
Okay, I'm going to bring in other members of the committee now. Mike.
Chair, thank you. Hi, Joe. I should declare, first of all, ownership of a wind turbine. So I am a micro generator, I suppose. When you talk about the mistakes of the past, does that include encouraging people like me to become a micro generator?
No, I think there was a place for it. I think the scheme that was established before was very successful in increasing from a situation where we had the desire there was not to increase micro generation, it was to increase renewables. The contribution that you and others in a similar position make has increased the amount of renewables on the system from a very small single figure percentage of total generation to a position now where, whilst the most recent published figures show some fall away in the percentage, but almost 50% of generation now comes from renewables, and micro generation make a contribution towards it, and that's a good thing.
And when I'm generating, that electricity either goes back into the grid or it's used for my domestic situation. And when it's the latter, does that not take a lot of pressure off the grid? And that, therefore, is a good thing. And, you know, you talked about getting up to 5%. If we were getting up to, 40, 50%, surely that would have a really positive impact on the need to invest in the grid.
Okay. Well, there would be a number of difficulties with that. First of all, the sheer cost and the expectation that consumers themselves would effectively provide their own electricity if we had 40 or 50% of micro generation at a consumer level. That's an enormous increase, just an almost inconceivable increase from current rates within any foreseeable time period. But if we were to do so, it would also bring forward some of the issues that I mentioned in my opening remarks about system reliability. When you have that number of micro generators contributing to the system, you need to make sure that you have reliability built into the system. And with that number of people contributing either through, generally speaking, wind or solar contributions, then the reality of it is that has an impact on system stability. And the thermal plant that's necessary to back it up so that when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, that you still have power available to you, means to say that there's a greater likelihood of thermal plant having to be switched on and switched off. That increases emissions and it increases costs.
I would say, Joe, that I think if we went back 10, 15 years, 40% from renewables was considered to be incredibly ambitious. And now today we're saying 70, 80%, or indeed how much can the grid actually tolerate? Because that should be the target.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, I don't want in any way to suggest that we shouldn't be aiming for those targets, indeed aiming to surpass those targets if we can. As we move to 2050, indeed, in UK terms, the government in London has expressed its view that 100% of electricity generation should come from renewable sources by 2035. What I've said in my opening remarks is what we need to understand through our policy is how we share the balance of that between large scale, small scale and micro generation in order to achieve those targets.
Understood. Am I right in saying that there's only so much that the grid can tolerate and that would not include 100%?
At the moment, there would be engineering challenges to achieve that, yes. But those are challenges which you quite rightly point out. They seem to be overly ambitious. I wasn't working on energy at the time, but when the Strategic Energy Framework was published in 2010 and set that 40% target for 2020, I suspect that there were some who thought that even half of that would be unachievable. But it has been achieved, and I think that the target that the Minister has mentioned previously of 70% renewables by 2030 seems just as ambitious now, but I'm confident we can achieve that.
Is the Achilles heel in terms of this proposed legislation the cost of connecting the micro generators to the grid?
There would be substantial cost, and that cost would have to be met somehow. And it's my concern that the attribution of that across all bill payers would be the unfairness in the system.
And more generally, Joe, when do you expect the strategy to be published?
I think the Minister has made it clear. He said so again this week during question time. He expects that to be published in the coming weeks and hopefully before the end of this year.
I would hate to think it slips out in Christmas week. but you can't comment on that. Final question, have you replaced Richard Rogers, or are you working with him? Or
I don't know that Richard Rogers is replaceable, Mike. Thomas Byrne, who is Director of Energy Strategy, has transferred to the Department of Finance, and I've taken up some of those responsibilities.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Good luck with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Tempted to add, Joe, of course, if we get the energy strategy very late, then then there should be a lump of coal from Santa for the Department of Economy, but that wouldn't be consistent with decarbonising energy. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Joe, and welcome to your new role. Essentially, listening to your opening remarks, really what I think you're saying to us is that we need to leave this to one side until the department comes forward with its energy strategy, and then we need to look to see where issues like this fit into that strategy. That might be an interesting concept if there wasn't perhaps just so much scepticism about the department and its ability to actually deliver any strategy, let alone an energy one. The area that you've touched on in terms of the detail of what we're talking about today is around, and I do take the point that was raised with us with the University of Ulster academic around the potential cost of this to poor consumers having to bear the cost through future electricity bills. But there are ways of working around that. The development of cooperatives and social enterprises can deliver. You know, it could be done on a street basis, it can be done on a community basis, it could be done on a community of interest basis anywhere across Northern Ireland. People just simply can become shareholders or part of a company. Those companies, particularly social enterprises and cooperatives, are highly skilled at being able to go out and attract the appropriate finance without having to touch public funds at all. That is a way of delivering equally for everybody. So again, I know you're probably going to say you're not going to tell us this, but are innovative things like that being considered in the energy strategy? And, you know, in absence of understanding what's going into the energy strategy, why would the committee wish to stop a bill like this, which has the potential to deliver those things?
Look, first of all, thank you for your welcome. What I'm suggesting is that the strategy is imminent, hopefully very imminent. And when you've seen that, it will set out a programme of work where we'll have to develop a range of policies across how we deliver against the renewables target. The renewables target is already in the public domain. Successive ministers now, I think it was first mentioned by Minister Dodds over a year ago, have suggested we're aiming for a 70% renewables target by 2030. Now, given that that's the case, we're going to have to develop a whole policy portfolio to see how we bring that forward across those different range of providers. You're quite right to make reference to the fact that we will have an opportunity to include community energy providers when we do that. And I think that as we develop policy, once the strategy has been published, we'll look at what the action plan says about the prioritisation of different areas within the strategy. And as we start the development and see where those policy areas are, we need to look in the round at where we source those renewables from and whether they are increasingly of a prosumer nature, which I mentioned in the remarks, communities developing energy for their own use rather than specifically exporting it back to the grid and seeking some income from that. I think it's the confusion around which of those objectives are trying to be met in what is described in the bill, which is a source of concern to me. I think microgeneration is a good thing. I think community energy projects are good things. I think we ought to support all of those things. I'm not sure that setting a legislative burden on the department is necessarily the best way to achieve those, or leaves us with the flexibility to respond to initiatives that come forward from the community or from other microgenerators over the coming period.
Chair, just very briefly, but if we don't set, and I understand what you're saying about perhaps some of the shortcomings of the bill, but if we don't set a legislative pressure on the department to do things, the reality is, and experience shows, that very little is actually done.
I won't comment on the second half of that, but in terms of setting, I'm quite happy that you should set legislative targets. I'm just not sure that this target necessarily contributes towards the wider goals and the strategic objectives that I think most people have agreed to. You know, the work that was undertaken over the last 2 years in the development of the strategy has involved a huge involvement with stakeholders, both from within the energy industry and from consumers generally, to make sure that what we will propose and what I hope we will see published in the next few weeks reflects what people want to see. Setting a legislative target around such a minor aspect of microgeneration, it seems to me, is not necessarily where I would start. I'm not suggesting it isn't appropriate at some later stage, but that would be on the back of having developed policies and gathered evidence, scrutinised that evidence and put forward proposals which we could see, rather than simply plumping for one at this stage at one end of the spectrum.
Okay, Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, just a question. If the individuals putting in microgeneration were not connecting to the grid, so effectively they're purely self-sufficient. So I'll pick my affluent colleague here from North Down, who's got his own turbine. If Mike, for example,
Frankfurt.
Look at me. So if my colleague had his connection to the grid wasn't there, would that make life easier? Because ultimately, use Mike as an example, he could be using 4 kilowatts tonight, sharing or cooking, tomorrow using nothing. Does that not create the problem?
It creates an issue that has to be addressed. It's not necessarily a problem. He's making a contribution towards the energy that's required for consumers across Northern Ireland, and that's a useful contribution. The suggestion in the bill is that the department would somehow sponsor the growth of this, and in sponsoring the growth of that, we would have to secure the resource for that from somewhere else. And the suggestion and the evidence that comes from the Ulster University report suggests that the people who gain the greatest benefit from that are people who have the wherewithal, no doubt like Mike, to be able to provide those facilities. But the sponsorship of it necessarily has to come from taxpayers and consumers. And when that's shared, it's shared disproportionately across people who are less in a position to be able to provide for it. And we're within the strategy, we'll talk about putting consumers at the heart of the strategy, and one of our targets in particular will be to address fuel poverty. It seems unreasonable that the first piece of legislation that would come forward after the publication of the strategy should be around increasing the costs on the people less able to pay for the benefit of the people who are more able to pay.
So several witnesses referred to, Joe, to us, the cart before the horse. Do you agree with that? Is this the cart before the horse?
I think it's the answer at the end of a continuum when we haven't started at the beginning of the continuum.
Yeah.
We need to assess what are the issues we're trying to address, what are the policies to put in place to address those options, and what policy levers, be they legislative or financial, do we want to put in place to give effect to those policies. What we've started with here is what's the lever we're going to use to introduce something that's not itself particularly well defined.
Thanks. Thank you, Joe, and apologise to my learned friend here from Frankfurt.
Suggesting I'd have a shower on a Wednesday. Outrageous.
Okay.
No one else has indicated.
No one else has indicated they want to ask any questions. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, Koichi, for your evidence and your time this afternoon. I think it's not quite this afternoon, this morning. We look forward to keeping in touch with the department, and we look forward to very much hearing. Actually, just quickly before I go on the energy strategy, I presume, and I of course I'd ask this anyway, that the department will give us good advance notice as to when the energy strategy is coming, so that we as committee members will be ready to scrutinise it and read it, even if it's on December 24th.
I would hope it won't be December 24th, and I have no doubt that the department will keep the committee fully apprised of all developments towards the publication of the strategy. I think, as we have done in fairness my predecessors, I know I've briefed the committee on a number of occasions, and indeed, whether on publication or after publication, I'd be very happy to come back and go through the detail of it again.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now going to move into closed session, I believe.
Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
Thank you, Clark. Agenda item 7 is at page 61, which is further to our discussion earlier on around the parental bereavement leave and pay bill. It is a response on repercussive costs. I would ask members to note, unless there are any further questions or comments to make. Thank you. Okay. Point 7.2, so that's a response at page 63 from the Minister regarding the Northern Ireland Holiday at Home scheme. We will also be discussing later on the Tourism Recovery Action Plan. Departmental economists considered the business case for the proposed scheme, but were unable to confirm that it offered value for money. Their main concern was that the business case was unable to provide any evidence that the revenue generated from bed nights would not have been generated without the scheme. So therefore, the scheme will not progress. Members, an additional £6.5 million of funding has been secured to undertake additional marketing through Tourism NI and Tourism Ireland. In addition, it is estimated that around £1.6 million of expenditure within the High Street scheme has been with accommodation providers and tourism attractions. Although I note we have had that number, but not. That's the only area where we have a detailed number.
Current estimation based on the merchant codes that have come back. So we have a briefing planned in the new year where all of that should be tallied, all of the data should be available in terms of what has been spent, where it's been spent, and what that business is. Yeah. So we'll be able to break it down on a sectoral basis. So we have that once the scheme concludes. But at the minute, that's a running estimate. Okay, so we will know. We'll be able to know how much of. If we know 1.6 has been spent with accommodation providers and tourism attractions, we'll know how much has been spent at Asda and Tesco. No offence to them. Unless any members have any comment, we'll note. Agenda item 8 is the domestic abuse safe leave bill. Hansard from the briefing received from Rachel Woods MLA is at page 66. And there is a draft motion to extend committee stage of the bill at page 4 of your table pack. So, members, if you are content, the motion extends committee stage of the bill to the 11th of February 2022. However, we will the committee will report before this date. The committee will report before this date should that be possible. So, if members are content, can we seek agreement on the following motion, that in accordance with Standing Order 33.4,
The period referred to in Standing Order 33.2 will be extended to 11th February 2022 in relation to the committee stage of the Domestic Abuse (Safe Leave) Bill, NIA Bill 41/1722. Members content?
Content.
Just a point, yeah, content with it, with the motion, no problem. But obviously we're not back here to, what, 14th, 15th?
Our first meeting will be that week, beginning the 10th, which is what the 12th of January is our first meeting. So the reason we've extended is our timeline still allows us, theoretically, to complete by the end of January. But we're building in a little bit of contingency because it is an extremely tight turnaround. And we don't intend to use that week and a half if we can possibly help it. I know there'd been a discussion indication before that the end of January was largely the advised period for legislation to proceed. What we've been advised by the Bill Office is that there are now a glut, if that's an appropriate term, of bills that will finish at the end of January. So even if we were finishing at the end of January, because it's a PMB, it wouldn't be scheduled first anyway. So the allowance of a week and a half has been advised that it is still workable. Executive bills will get priority for further stages before PMBs do, but we're still working on the basis that this will still be able to be completed.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll finish early if we can.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Women's Aid, moving on, members, Women's Aid will provide an oral briefing on the bill at next week's next week's meeting. The Men's Advisory Project have also been invited to give evidence at the same time. RAISE will present their paper on the bill next week. And members, it's also worth being aware that the Citizen Space Survey on the bill was published on Friday, 3rd December. The public call for evidence will be published on Wednesday, the 8th of December. So moving on to agenda item 9, the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, which we obviously discussed in plenary yesterday. There is a response from Queen's University Belfast at page 80 of your packs. A response from the Open University, whom I neglected to mention yesterday and was very vociferously pulled up on it by Steve Aiken, MLA, as he's wanted to do, but he was right. That's at page 6 of your table papers, and obviously, members, the legislative consent motion was agreed in the Assembly yesterday. So, members, both responses from QUB and the Open University are generally supportive. QUB have highlighted a number of areas to monitor in terms of implementation of ARIA, which it would be worth us highlighting to the Department in the absence of our usual committee report. So, members, I would ask you to note that correspondence. Agenda.
Sorry, just
and if there's any comments, yeah?
Yeah, no, that's kind of. I just wondered, this thing was almost what they call it procedural about the opportunities. Obviously, a note in terms of, call it involvement with the ARIA bill. There's been obviously specific responses from Queen's and the Open University. I'm just wondering, is it a question of just simply there hasn't been any particular response out of you, or do they not see themselves being involved in it?
We simply, Chair, I don't think the timescale we were giving was incredibly tight, so we just hadn't had a response from them yet.
No, that's okay.
We would still anticipate one.
That's okay. No, I noted that even in terms of general feedback, there seemed to be a level of involvement. I presume in terms of the detail of it, it is effectively supposed to take the points that were made yesterday in terms of maximising the opportunities, particularly locally in that regard. It is open to all universities and other groups. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 10, which is SR 21319, 319, the High Street Amendment, the High Street Coronavirus Financial Assistance Scheme Amendment Regulations NI 2021. A clerk's memo is contained at page 82. And SR 2021-319, High Street Coronavirus Financial Assistance Scheme Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2021 at page 83. There is an explanatory memorandum for these at page 85. So these are to make a technical adjustment to the list of excluded merchant category codes in the regulation Members, this statutory rule is subject to the negative resolution procedure. Members, we considered that SL1 at our meeting on the 24th of November, and there have been no changes to the policy content ever since. The rule will come into operation on the 1st of December. Members, the Examiner of Statutory Rules has not yet reported on this rule, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. Are members content? If members are content with the SR, without any comment, the following I put the following question: that the Committee for Economy has considered SR 2021-319, the High Street Coronavirus Financial Assistance Scheme Amendment Regulations NI 2021, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. Members content?
Content.
Okay, moving on then to agenda item 11, which is correspondence. At page 89, we have a report from Renewables NI, which I believe probably many of us have received separately. It's entitled Powering a Green Economy, so that's for members to note. I think I certainly received it in correspondence as an MLA, and I'm sure others did on the committee. Next is a copy of the Competition Markets Authority Annual Plan 22-23, the consultation NI. But Peter, is that's their annual plan plus with a specific NI consultation?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's at page 123 for members to note. At page 162 is a copy of MRDE's accounts for 2020-21 at page 162 for members to note. A copy of BSDL's accounts for 2020-21 at page 203 for members to note. And at page 241 is a copy of the DFE, the Department of Economy Economic Commentary for Winter 2021, which is again at page 241 for members to note. Members, correspondence from Disability Action is at page 256 regarding a number of issues concerning the Disability Specialist Support Contract within the old Training for Success contract and New Skills for Work and Life and Apprenticeships programme. If members are content, we will forward these concerns to the Department for their actions. Content. Yep. Members, there's correspondence from the Minister at page 8 of your tabled papers regarding the subsidy control bill, stating that although legislative consent is required, this is the subsidy control bill, which I believe is going through Westminster at the minute, the Minister does not have enough information on the bill to allow him to take any decision on whether to agree or refuse the request. So discussions will continue with the UK government around this. So we ask members to note. I presume the Department will keep in touch with us on that. At page 9 of the tabled papers, members, we have the correspondence from the Committee of Education regarding the Period Products Bill. That's again at page 9 of tabled papers. And if members are agreed, we will use the committee's Twitter channel to promote the bill to committee stakeholders. If members are content, my colleague Pat Catney would be, I think, getting on at me if we didn't agree to it. So I'm glad members are in agreement. At page 11 of tabled papers, we have correspondence from the Clerk of the Finance Committee regarding the statement made by the Minister, the Economy Minister, that is, during consideration stage of the parental bereavement leave and pay bill around repercussive costs. The Finance Committee has written to the Finance Minister to seek clarity on the matter, and the committee, the Economy Committee, will be copied into the response. I should declare that I'm a member of the Finance Committee too. So we'll ask members to note. Members from the same committee, there's correspondence from the Clerk of the Finance Committee at page 14 of tabled papers. Finance Committee has written to the Economy Minister regarding the Westminster Draft Online Safety Bill and its applicability in Northern Ireland, and the potential for overlap with the Defamation Bill, the sponsor of which is on this committee, and the committee will be copied into the response that the that committee gets. I don't know if you have any comment to make on that, Mike? No. Okay, so we'll just ask members to note. At page 33 is correspondence from Pivotal, the think tank, providing a copy of its new research into educational migration from the North, with data gathered from surveys and interviews with more than 340 people who have left for study and or work. It's obviously a subject that I'm very enthused about. I think it's something that we as a committee should be doing more work on, but for now, I just ask members to note. I would commend the report, though. I think it's very important, and the evidence base, I think, is sobering. If at page 53 is a copy of the Consumer Council corporate plan. That's at page 53 for members to note. Page 82 of tabled papers is correspondence from English UK, which is excuse me, the National Association for British Council Accredited English Language Schools, on behalf of the 3 private sector member centres here regarding financial support for that sector. I would remind members that the committee has written to the department in support of this sector on a number of occasions previously, including last week. Clerk, have we had a response on those?
Not yet, Chair. It was part of a letter we wrote about support for travel agents as well, with potential new restrictions coming in.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 14 is the departmental written briefing on the tourism recovery action plan, which is a written briefing at page 84 of tabled papers. It is a high-level report, members, and it was obviously 6 months after the publication of Phase 2 TRAP. I don't know if they're using that acronym enthusiastically. It doesn't seem one of those acronyms that possibly wasn't thought through with the huge amount of. 6 months after the publication of the Phase 2 TRAP in May, it highlights the work undertaken since the plan was published. The department states that a more detailed monitoring report of the TRAP actions is also underway, and that this will be made available to the committee for the economy for any future oral evidence session, which is definitely one to watch. But for now, we'll ask members to know.
We have the oral evidence session plan. It's always easier to do it that way than try and get through the written briefings, so we have that scheduled.
We'll keep our trap shut for now. We've moved to agenda item 15, which is the written departmental briefing on the economic recovery action plan. So members, I refer you to page 101 of tabled papers on the economic recovery action plan, including a list of 13 new actions. So this will require more detailed analysis from the committee. An oral evidence session on the ERAP is planned for 19th of January, and I suppose I would note that I think that will be particularly important given what we know about the underspend from the department. If anyone has any comments, if no detailed comments, I'll just ask members to note. For now, okay, so moving on, agenda item 12 is any other business. I don't have any other business unless any members have anything to raise. In that case, agenda item 13 is the date, time and place of the next meeting. The committee will next meet on Wednesday the 15th of December, our final one before Christmas. We won't do Secret Santa. We won't be having any parties planned or otherwise. We will meet at 10 a.m. on the Wednesday 15th of December in this room, room 30, Parliament Buildings. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.